anyone who's really broken down the basics of what you need to learn on your instrument knows how to teach a beginner. They know how to construct it, and they don't have a problem with the idea.
Teachers all through that time. I had three teachers at my high school, and this lady before the high school. None of them involved me in theory or the fun of the construction of a piece. No one would ever say, you look at a Mozartian run, and they would never say, you know, that, instead of just watching your fingering and stuff, you know, that's an A-flat minor scale. That's an A-flat minor arpeggio.
I really came to music on a few different occasions. I started when I was in college and took a music theory course, and I enjoyed that. And at that time I got interested in jazz. I had a friend who played in the college jazz band. I used to go and watch, and I always sort of wanted to do it. So I wouldn't say at that time my interests really grew. And I had a saxophone, which was my father's.
You know, my kind of fantasy about playing the bass needed to be implemented now, or it was never going to happen. So it was 8 years ago that I decided I needed to start playing.
Sandy, I actually started playing when I was 7 years old, back in 1957. And there's a little bit of an interesting story behind that. I actually brought a prop with me.
Oh, show me.
My sister was 5 years older than me, so at the time she was 12.
The saxophone is my first and only instrument. I picked it up in 2004 when I decided as part of my midlife crisis I was going to learn how to play a musical instrument. I picked the saxophone.
All right. And did that help with your crisis?
No.
I've been taking lessons with Dan Weiner for more than 10 years. I want to produce this video because it's my story too. My cousin's son gave me his first bass guitar in trade for some computer equipment, and that started everything. What's it like to play with Van Morrison and Bonnie Raitt?
It's very interesting. I mean, that's a long question, though. It's not an easy answer, but they're both consummate musicians, and you can feel a tremendous beingness radiating from them. There's just solidity in what they're putting out. That's just. When I first played with Van, I knew right away when I was playing with him I was dealing with someone of a different caliber than I'd played with before.
Wow.
I was 22, so I hadn't played with anyone who was, up there in the line.
Tell me, Dan, what steps does a student follow from starting an instrument to ensemble playing?
Well, Sandy, as you know, playing in an ensemble is very different than playing music by yourself. When we're playing in an ensemble, we're creating music with other people. So we've got to have everybody playing in the same place at the same time. Now, how do we get there? You know, from private lessons. Well, there's a lot of things people can do to get to that point, to develop a good sense of time. One, of course, is to practice with a metronome. Some people find that very, very boring. So there are alternatives. There are alternatives. That's all right. The save was good. The save was very good. I like that. Oh, right on. Let's try that head out again. Let's try it a little bit brighter than we just played. Ba-da-ba, ba-ba, ba-da-da, ba-ba. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, Another thing that is going to be very different is arriving at commonality in what we're playing. And for that, in an ensemble, we usually use what's called a lead sheet. A lead sheet is a piece of paper with the music, the melody printed on it, and the chords printed above it. To get to the point where we can understand that different instrumentalists have to work on different things. A melody instrument player, of course, has got to learn where the notes are on his instrument, has to learn how to follow that chart to produce the sound. Where a person that plays chords on his instrument has to be able to find those chords on the instrument. Bass players, of course, have to do a little bit of both. And drummers need to be able to follow the chart so they can know exactly what time fill happens and where to place their emphasis. Let's do fours.
Hey, he's got the head turned around.
Yeah, trying to do four.
Well, that's the thing. That's
how you know. That's a signal.
That's a signal. I like that.
Oh, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
how do you blend students with different levels of ability?
And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. I guess the first step is just to ascertain different people's strengths and different people's weaknesses. And from there, pick musical selections that play to everybody's strengths. And yeah, of course, as people go on, their strengths get greater and greater, and they can accept greater and greater challenges. I find too that stronger players are more than willing to help the ones that are weaker in certain aspects. Communication, that's the key.
Yeah, what's the role of mistakes when you're learning music?
And mistakes simply show us what we need to work on. There's, of course, different levels of mistakes. We might think that, okay, we didn't play this particular passage cleanly enough, or there were a couple of notes we could have played different. Those are minor mistakes. Doesn't matter a bit. The mistakes that in a group setting that need to be confronted are when we find ourselves in different places than the rest of the group.
Okay. How does the student recognize a mistake?
That mistake is pretty easy to recognize. All of a sudden, you'll be playing something and it'll sound completely off.
Okay. And what do you think the student should do immediately when they make a mistake?
Immediately, the thing to do is just realize, oh, I've made a mistake here. Realize it's not such a big deal. Realize the point where the mistake was made, and at home, just practice that.
Okay.
The Navy, in its infinite wisdom, sent me to the Naval Justice School in Newport, Rhode Island, as an instructor, and that's what brought me to New England in 1994, and I've been here ever since.
Nice. Is saxophone your first instrument? Did you play something before then?
The saxophone is my first and only instrument. I picked it up in 2004 when I decided, as part of my midlife crisis, I was going to learn how to play a musical instrument, and I picked the saxophone.
Great. And did that help with your crisis?
No. Eventually, I am now starting a new career, and I'll be moving next week to the Washington, D.C. to start with the State Department.
Excellent.
So the changes continue.
Well, we wish you the best of luck with that.
I thought, you know, my kind of fantasy about playing the bass needed to be implemented now, or it was never going to happen. So it was 8 years ago that I decided I needed to start playing.
Excellent. Is that your first instrument?
I had taken piano lessons when I was a kid, but I never took them seriously and never really learned to read music. Botched a number of recitals, which gave me a terror of performing in public, and finally just dropped out. After I'd embarrassed my piano teacher enough times, I thought, that's it, I'm out here.
Well, Sandy, I actually started playing when I was 7 years old, back in 1957. And there's a little bit of an interesting story behind that. I actually brought a prop with me.
Oh, show me. Tell me more.
My sister was 5 years older than me, so at the time she was 12. And she was into Dick Clark and a lot of the music going on at that time. And she had this particular album, Dance with Dick Clark. And the guitars on here were very twangy, and they just caught my ear. They spoke to me. So I asked my parents if I could take guitar lessons, and they were on board with that. So starting when I was 7, I started playing. And it's been great. I've had different teachers over the years. Took lessons basically right through high school, and then when I went to college, I kind of put the guitar aside and didn't start picking it up again until probably the last 8 years or so, when I had an opportunity to explore what I had left behind. And as I went on through junior high school, I joined my first band in 7th grade and went through different bands, 8th, 9th grade, and 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. And we would be playing at YMCA's. My background was all rock and roll in junior high school and high school, but I really wanted to learn how to play jazz. And that's when I started in 2002. I really did a focus on that. I bought some jazz books and was trying to learn from the books. And then I had a teacher, Adam Larrabee, who has since moved to Virginia, who's a fantastic jazz guitarist. And I stayed with him for a couple of years before he left. And so basically since 2002, I've been just focusing on jazz. And it's very challenging, you know, theory and improvisation. It's hard work, definitely. And been taking lessons with Dan Weiner now through John Payne, and also obviously part of the ensemble for the last 2.5 years or something like that. And I came to the ensemble through Ed Musman, one of the saxophone players in the group. Apparently there was a guitar player who had been in the ensemble who had left, and Ed knew I played and asked me if I wanted to join. So I was basically doing similar things as Nancy, that is practicing by myself. And it's really not the right thing to do if you want to play music correctly. You really need to get with other people and interact with them.
What's needed for a music educator to succeed at a school like John Payne Music Center?
They have to, I shouldn't give this one away, but they have to have absolutely no problem. In fact, they should even be turned on to the idea of having a complete beginner. It's not like, oh God, I have to start this guy from scratch. Because I think that anyone who's really broken down the basics of what you need to learn on your instrument knows how to teach a beginner. They know how to construct it, and they don't have a problem with the idea. And I think that the main thing I always like to stress is that, I don't know if you saw that thing I put in the last mailer for our about the dwindling spiral of, you see that thing, that sheet? That there's tends to be too much emphasis on how good you are or how good you aren't, you know, and it's not that you don't want to improve, that's not an important thing, but people lose sight of the fact that they didn't take it up so they could, you know, play their A-flat 7 scale at 80 on the metronome in 16th notes. That's not why they took it up. They took it up because they saw people playing, oh wow, that looks like fun, I want to do that. And people tend to lose sight of that. And I wanted to make the point that having that enthusiasm and excitement and joy out of playing can come at any level. I've had people who are very low getting incredible enjoyment out of it, and I've had people who are very high who are just like, you know, they're so frustrated about how they want to be even better that they're not getting a lot of fun out of it. It's too bad. So the way I look at it here, and it's not like there's an orthodoxy that we enforce, but I think it trickles down through the attitudes I have, is that, you know, that everyone at every level of how they play should be respected for that, and they can have fun at every level, and that you should start people in groups. You don't wait till they're really good, then let them play in a group. You get them in groups early, so they can learn early on to play with a group, especially, as you know, as a rhythm section player. You know, I mean, how good a bass player are you going to be if you've never played with a band? You just can't do it. I mean, you don't understand what your function is unless you play with a group. You know, if you're part of a rhythm section, you really are part of a section way even more than in other instances. So that, you know, and you can see, I've seen bass players develop in here, you know, over years. Say, they're getting it more, they're getting it. You know, they're getting what they're providing for the group.
What is it that a student needs to get started in this process? And what are the elements that need to be incorporated in order for them to succeed?
Well, both. Just a certain level of openness and enthusiasm. If somebody comes in with that, everything else will follow in place very easily. A whole bunch of stuff. Playing music with other people is just such a wonderful experience. It's true that the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. Everybody will be contributing something, and people will be able to incorporate that into their own playing and contribute it back. A very positive feedback loop is established. Also, when you're playing with other people, then you learn a lot about other people's instruments also. Not necessarily that you'll be able to play their instruments, but you'll understand how other instruments work.
So today we might do a little more of that.
Okay.
Hello there, sir.
How you doing?
Nice to see you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. How about you?
20 to 25 years ago, I decided I had enough of that. I was going to find a jazz teacher. And so I found one in North Andover, and he was just so much fun. He had written his own orchestrations. He taught theory. He had 2 pianos, and if you started to play and it started to be fun, he might sit down at his piano, and it was an entirely different process. And I started to learn theory. And then I think he left. He had to go. That lasted about 2 years. So then I was in community theater. That's now about 20 years ago. And in one of the cast parties, the guy who played bass in the pit sat down and started to play the tunes in the show. I want to take lessons with you. That started about, it must be 20 years ago now. So we've been having lessons in the fall, the winter, and weekly lessons for all that time. I don't know if it was 4 or 5 years ago. I was in golf school, and down 2 students from me hitting drives was this Asian-looking guy. And that was Herman Yee, who happened to mention while we were chatting between lessons that they just lost their piano player. So that's when I joined the John Payne Music Center, and from then on it's just been wonderful to play with others and play with my teacher. I continue the lesson.
So as I got into the music, the thing that really turned it around for me was the work I did at the John Payne Music Center. So I was very fortunate to find John as a teacher, and everyone has wonderful teachers that they can look back at in terms of things that, how they made a difference for them. And John did that for me. And so he coaches me, continues to coach me now as I take lessons with him. But what he was able to do for me that I think was really meaningful is he was able to take the anxiety and the worry out of the learning process. So as I started, he would say to me, don't worry about where you are or what you're doing. Let me worry about where you are and what you're doing. You're doing all the, I know exactly where you are. I've done this many times. You're going to get it. And if you had asked me when I started, and I'm going to answer the question about the practice, if you'd asked me when I started this 8 years ago, really, would I be doing what we did today or get a chance to play in a club like Riles with the group, I would have said you were crazy. It was just not possible. I didn't have the ability to do that. So really having the right teachers made the difference. So what John has sort of encouraged me is a little bit of practice on a regular basis is really the key to drilling the process.
In what ways is it different teaching children and adolescents and teaching adults?
That's an interesting question. In a lot of ways it's not different. The main difference is that you get a higher percentage of kids who are not self-motivated to do it because there's some push from the parents for them to do it. That can be a problem sometimes. There's been a few times when I've had to sit down with parents and try to make the case for them that their kid should not continue lessons with me because he really doesn't want to do it. I've done that, take them in and try to be on the kid's side for that because I don't think it should be done as something that you want to do. I mean, you can try it out for a little while even if the kid doesn't want to do it and see if he gets into it, but it comes a point where there's plenty of great things to do in life. I think music is one of them, but it's not for everybody.
Is performance anxiety an obstacle to playing?
Absolutely, of course, yeah.
And are there methods for dealing with performance
Yeah,
anxiety?
the main method is to just go do it, you know. You just go out there and do it, and in most cases that starts to get better just from that. In fact, I'm trying to think if there's any other method. I mean, I'm going blank here. What else do you do about that? Well, you want to be as prepared as you can be. And we set it up when we have our battles of the bands. I mean, everyone in the audience is either another student musician or the family of another, or friend of another student musician, so it's a pretty safe environment. So we regard that as a really good stepping stone, because you are performing, you're performing in a real jazz club, it's for real, but the audience is kind of, you know, no one paid the big bucks to see you because you're a professional status, and we have groups in there who are quite good and in between and very beginning, and we don't care. If they're willing to get up there, we'll let them get up there.
Last question. I know people have an opportunity to perform in front of an audience. Is performance anxiety something to be expected?
Oh yeah, that's going to occur all the time for a lot of reasons. Here you are, you're up there, you're pretty exposed just playing music. A lot of times people will project too their own insecurities about their playing on the audience. They think the audience is looking at them, and like that scene in Carrie, they're all going to laugh at you. They're all going to laugh at me. No, it's not true. They're not all going to laugh at you. They're not all going to laugh at you. They're there to enjoy what you're playing. And the only real way to get rid of that, of course, let me back up a bit and say that it exists at different levels with different people. Some people, they don't experience it at all. Other people, it can be quite crippling. And the only way to really get rid of it is just to do it again and again and again. The more you do it, the more natural it feels.
you.